Hi there, I'm Tim Marriott. I'm a writer and performer currently touring Watson, The Final Problem, a fantastic Sherlockian adventure which is written with Bert Coules and directed by Bert, who's an absolute legend, and performed by me.
Tell me a little bit about how this show came about.
How this piece came about? Well, I was on a skiing holiday in Meiringen in early 2020, and we went to Meiringen is where the Reichenbach Falls are, which is the famous place where Holmes fell to his alleged death in the arms of his nemesis Moriarty. And there's a statue there in the main square of Meiringen, and even a Sherlock Holmes museum, which we were fascinated by. We went for a walk up to the Reichenbach Falls, and then later over dinner we were talking about it, and we were talking about how this story must have deeply affected Dr. Watson, and how must have he have felt. And we tend to focus in the stories, the Sherlockian stories, on Sherlock Holmes. And of course, Conan Doyle wrote in the first person. He wrote as Watson. And so we thought it'd be fascinating to investigate that. I thought, how on earth will we have, I was busy touring at the time, and I thought, how on earth will I have time to write this piece? And then, of course, this was February 2020, and we discovered we had plenty of time to write this new piece. That's how it came about.
And what do you remember about some of the earlier drafts of the script that you worked on with Bert?
Well, with Bert was the key. I realised that in taking on a Sherlockian adventure, I needed to have some expert advice on board, and I am not steeped in Holmesian lore. So I approached the wonderful Bert Coules, who wrote all the BBC adaptations of all 56 stories in the late 1990s and early 2000s for Clive Merrison and Michael Williams to perform on radio. And I wrote to him and asked if he would be willing to help, and he was, and he's absolutely brilliant. He and I came up with the idea of what I wanted to do, and he wrote the first draft script, and we pinged it backwards and forwards until we had something that we felt we were happy with. And of course we had a bit of time to do this because this was all in lockdown during the pandemic. So the first thing we did was record an audio version of it. And I didn't have a studio or audio equipment, so I did that under a duvet in my bedroom. and Bert, having previously, in a previous existence, before being a head writer at the BBC, had been a sound engineer. So he was able to put lots of sound effects on it. And that's how we created the piece. And then as things lifted and theatres began to open up again, we were able to do a couple of rudimentary performances of it. Took it to the Edinburgh Fringe in 2021, which is a very small fringe then, and it sold out, which was amazing. So we went back there in 2022 and sold out again. And it's been. I just got back from Adelaide in Australia, where we've been touring it, and we're now touring it around the UK and going back yet again to the Edinburgh Festival this August, and hoping we're going to do all right there too.
And what do you remember about some of the early rehearsals?
Well, of course, learning the lines is a challenge. Everyone always says to you after a performance of any solo show, they said, or any show really, they say, how on earth do you remember the lines? And you always tend to sort of pass it off and go, oh, well, that's the job, learning the lines. But actually, no, it is. It is a significant challenge, learning the lines. So what I did was I went for long dog walks across the South Downs where I live. With my dog Bangers, and he must have got very bored of listening to me reciting Sherlock Holmes stories to him as we walked across the downs, and that was the significant challenge. But of course, that's very in character for Dr. Watson to be walking his dog across the South Downs, or at least I felt it was. And so in doing so, I also began to find a little bit of the character. And then going to a rehearsal room with Bert, and Bert acting as director, sound designer, co-writer. He's a man of many parts. We were able to sort of pull that together and add the sound effects and create an interesting story, or at least we hope is an interesting story.
And how do you feel this play relates to other Sherlock Holmes plays that have been over the years?
Well, it was very important to us to be authentic and to be respectful of the genre, but also in investigating Watson and the character of Watson. There's not an awful lot of depth, particularly like his relationship with Mary, his wife, is not really covered in any depth by Sherlock Holmes. So we had to be a little bit creative in developing more of a character for Watson and his background. And of course, this is also, the 1890s was a period of Gothic shadow and drama. Freud was developing his theories about the shadow self and duality. And of course, this is a story that deals very closely with duality. And Holmes himself says that he believed he could have made a formidable criminal, and perhaps in another life he could have been like Moriarty, or even Moriarty himself. In many ways, Moriarty is the shadow self, the shadow half of Holmes as presented in the story. So we wanted to reflect a little bit of that as well, and that of course has contemporary reference for where we are now, or we felt it had. So we tell a traditional Sherlock Holmes story, but actually with perhaps a little bit of insight into the character of Watson and into his own tragedy. This is a man who has lost his, in 1894 where the play is set, this is a man who's lost his great companion, Sherlock Holmes. He's lost his wife. Conan Doyle kills off his wife. Mary is dead. This is a man who's broken, who's traumatized, but comes alive through telling his story. And that was something that we felt was an important theme to grapple with, particularly coming out of the pandemic, where a lot of people felt that they lost their sense of purpose, their sense of usefulness. And that's something that we all need, and one way of doing that is to tell our stories. So not only do we tell Watson stories, but we hope we encourage other people to tell their stories too.
And do you think you've had an emotional connection to the character?
Oh, very much so. I find the more I do it, and I've done it quite a few times now, the more I find a personal identification with the character. I understand his trauma, I understand his tragedy, and I also understand his stoicism and his humour, and that's another important theme within the piece. That sense of stoicism that we have to bash on. We have to keep on, if you'll excuse the expression, keep buggering on. That's what we have to do.
So, what's been the overall reaction from the audience?
Well, it's been amazing. You'd have to ask the audience, really. But I've been really, really fortunate. So I just got back from Adelaide, where we sold out, and had really wonderful responses from the audience. Very, very generous, and people in Australia are very direct. If they like you, they tell you, "We like you, mate." They tend to tell you, which is great. Yeah, I've been very fortunate. We've had some very nice reviews from people who've seen it, and I'm embarrassed, really. I don't want to. Don't really know how to answer that question. Ask the audience.
And if there was one place you could take this show, where would it be and why?
Oh gosh, what a huge question that is. I don't know. I'd love to take it abroad. I'd like to do more touring across, maybe into Europe, but maybe to America. That would be nice. I just want to keep working, keep doing it. I love doing the show. I love the character of Watson. It fits very comfortably with me. I've always felt that I'm more the second in command rather than the commander in anything that I'm involved in. I always like to work collaboratively. I don't like to lead from the front. I don't like sticking my head above the parapet very much. Perhaps I'm not very brave, I don't know. So the idea of riding shotgun to Sherlock Holmes is something that sits very comfortably with me, and that's why it was so great to have Bert Coules working with me throughout the creation of the process. And when I go on tour, I'm very fortunate to have somebody with me who goes on tour with me and operates the sound and makes sure that I'm in one piece as I do the show before and after. Otherwise, I think I'd struggle if I was on my own.
And tell me a little bit more about the design of the show, so the set design and the costume, and Watson's.
Yes, look at
what you're wearing today. Tell me a little bit more.
Well, I don't know if anybody. Here's a quiz question. I don't know if anybody might recognise the tie, but that is, would you believe it? Dr. Watson was a former soldier, and this is the other thing I mentioned. He's a broken man. Not only has he lost Sherlock Holmes, not only has he lost his wife, but he's also a veteran of Afghanistan, having been wounded. We say twice, once in the shoulder, once in the leg. So we say Dr. Watson is later the 5th Northumberland Fusiliers. And I went on eBay and I couldn't believe that I actually found a tie that is of the 5th Northumberland, well, I don't know if it's the 5th, but Northumberland Fusiliers tie, which was, so that's what that is. So I thought I had to wear that. But we wanted to, because it's storytelling, we want to keep the set design very, very simple. So I have a big Afghan rug that we lay out, which is 4 meters by 3 meters. and a big red leather chair that sits centre stage for the storyteller, a bit like Jack and Ori, really, if anybody remembers that, telling his story with a little side table. But then to one side there's a stand with an old coat on it and an old hat, which I refer to as Sherlock Holmes. So whenever I talk about Sherlock Holmes, I look wistfully over to my right. And then I have a writing desk on my left. Of course, Watson has to have a writing desk because he wrote the stories. So I have a writing desk on my left, but on that sits a picture of my beloved wife, Mary. So when I talk about Mary, I have her on stage with me. I say I like to work collaboratively. Well, I kind of do, in that I have multiple characters on stage with me. I have Mary to my left and I have Sherlock Holmes to my right. And over my shoulder and behind me, I have Professor Moriarty.
And what are the 3 things that you have learned by playing Watson and doing this show?
I think the first thing is to respect the material, to respect the genre. There are lots of people who are very steeped in knowledge of Sherlock Holmes and Sherlock Holmes' stories, and to respect that background and material and to be authentic in what you do is very, very important. Second thing to learn, I guess, never underestimate the task in hand. No matter how many times I do it, it has to be fresh minted, of course. But actually, I'm always living the lines in my head all the time, and to be fully involved in what I'm doing is very dangerous to drift off in a performance. Sometimes you can be reciting the lines, and sometimes into your mind comes some other thought completely, and that's not a very good idea. So to stay focused and stay concentrated, stay steeped in it is really important. And 3, I think this is really, really basic, but actually not to take on too much. I'm 127 years old, and there was one Edinburgh Fringe where I took on 3 shows a day, and that was not a good idea. And I think the balance of performances against time at the moment is probably ideal. I need to pace myself at my advanced years.
Okay, thank you very much for your time today, Tim.
Thank you so much. Thank you.